session, the focus of which is on communication. So I'm Richard Tassin from the Department of Sociology, and I've got the privilege of chairing the talks in this session. So we've got one pre-recorded, one on Zoom, and two in person. So we're having a full kind of hybrid experience here. So our first talk is by KIRSTY JOHNSTONE from the University of Sheffield, and Kath is going to make the magic happen, aren't you?
We're hoping.
Let's
give us a try.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for not being here in person today. My name is KIRSTY JOHNSTONE, and I'm a Year 3 PhD student at Sheffield, currently part-time. And today I'd like to discuss the ability of gestural information to mislead children's memory of a witnessed event. For the purpose of the presentation today, I am going to give a short overview of some of the current research on eyewitness interviews. I am going to discuss how our research is contributing to this body of knowledge, and also talk about the implications of our findings in relation to police interviews and some of the ongoing questions in eyewitness research. Eyewitness research is incredibly important for helping understand how to get accurate and reliable evidence during police interviews. In some cases, an eyewitness is often the only form of evidence in a crime, and research shows that the presence of an eyewitness increases the chance of a conviction by more than half. Eyewitness accounts are highly susceptible to post-event information, however, which can corrupt the original memory and create very plausible false memories. Despite the importance of eyewitness accounts, there can be quite a few problems collecting accurate and reliable information during an interview. These include things like weapon focus, where the presence of a weapon at a crime reduces recall of other peripheral details, source misattribution, in which the source of a memory is confused. For example, did I see that, did I hear it, or did I just think it in my head? Social pressure, where you feel pressured to say the right thing, even if it might contradict your original memory. Spontaneous false memory, made famous by the DRM paradigms, where items that have cognitive links in the brain can also become linked in the original memory. The last two on the list are the two that are probably most important for my research, and that is suggested false memory, whereby information which is suggested to you as being correct is incorporated into your original memory trace, and this mainly occurs through post-event misinformation, where conversations with other witnesses, parents, social workers, etc., even the police, can actually corrupt witness accounts. The susceptibility of memory to post-event misinformation has been shown in a variety of false memory implantation studies. These generally work by researchers speaking to a participant's family to produce a plausible but false memory of something that happened to them as a child. These can be things such as getting lost in a shopping centre as a child, or even being attacked by a vicious animal or nearly drowning. Over a number of interviews, participants begin to embellish the original story with more and more details as the false memory becomes more vivid and real to them, highlighting how misinformation can alter people's lived reality simply through suggestion. Moving on to children as eyewitnesses, in a recent report, over 250,000 child abuse offences were recorded by the police in 2019, of which only 4% resulted in a charge being brought, mainly due to evidential difficulties. Unfortunately, since the pandemic, these figures have skyrocketed, with child abuse cases on the rise. This is compounded by the fact that in child abuse cases, children are often the only witness, and during the pandemic, there was less opportunities for children to disclose information or access the required services.
Couldn't see anything down there.
police guidelines are extensive with regard to avoiding verbally leading a witness. Leading a witness occurs when post-event information is directly or indirectly suggested during an interview. For example, a question might presume certain information, suggest or imply a particular answer, or include details not previously mentioned by the interviewee. Importantly, no guidelines currently exist regarding non-verbal information, despite research showing close links between gestural information and speech, and evidence demonstrating the unconscious and repeated use of gesture by interviewers. So, what is gestural misinformation in this context? Gestural misinformation during an interview occurs in the same way as a verbally leading question. For example, do you remember what the man looked like? If this was followed by some indication of the eye area, for example, this may lead witnesses to think that the man must have been wearing glasses. In this case, this is accurate. If, however, a gesture was made around the chin, it may be that witnesses say that the man had a beard. In this condition, this would be inaccurate and therefore misleading. Following from previous research, my first study aimed to replicate and extend findings, with a focus on improving methodological issues. I recruited 63 children aged 5 to 6 and 7 to 8 years old and designed an interview in order to assess not only the ability of gestural misinformation to mislead, but also how the type of gesture and the type of question may affect this. In study 1, I recruited 21 children aged 11 to 16 with moderate intellectual difficulties. This was so I could examine children more representative of children who have been neglected or maltreated, who, research shows, often present with similar cognitive deficiencies. A typical misinformation paradigm was used. Children watched a 5-minute video, followed by a free recall session where open-ended prompts were used to elicit information. A formal interview then took place, comprised of 12 questions counterbalanced by condition, so either no gesture at all or an accurate or misleading gesture, and scripts were additionally counterbalanced by gesture and question type, so either the gesture would be salient and highly visible, or more subtle and less obvious. And questions would be about events either central to the video plot, for example, what was the girl doing or wearing, or regarding more peripheral details, such as a description of someone more in the background. After a short distractor task, children underwent a final free recall session. Combining the data from studies 1 and 2 showed that the mean number of correct, incorrect, and don't know responses were comparable across groups, depending on which condition the question was asked in. This looks like quite a lot of information here, but the important thing to note is that when given an accurate gesture, all groups were more likely to give a correct response. Similarly, when no gesture was given, all groups were more likely to not be able to give an answer, compared to when a gesture was used, highlighting the use of gesture as a source of information. When a misleading gesture was given, you can see here that an incorrect answer was much more likely, and that this again was the same for all groups tested. Furthermore, incorrect answers were significantly more likely to be an answer consistent with the gesture given for all groups, as you can see here, compared to other answers. This means that for the misleading gesture of hat, for example, children were significantly more likely to give the answer hat than any other incorrect answer, highlighting that children use gesture as a source of information even when that information contradicts their memory of the event. With regard to the type of question and gesture, salient gestures were shown to be the most misleading condition, misleading children 39% of the time. This was followed by questions about peripheral details, which misled 31% of the time, and central questions and subtle gestures misleading 19 and 11% of the time respectively. Findings so far have implications for guidelines regarding investigating interviews with children, highlighting that no level of gesture is safe and that all interviews should be video recorded and assessed for non-verbal communication between the interviewer and interviewee. Similarly, police guidelines should show that some questions may be more vulnerable to false memory effects than others, and specialist care should be taken. I've included some discussion points here that I think would be really interesting to answer, although I'm not sure really how I'd go about that. The first is that I wondered whether misinformation actually impaired the original memory by altering the traces originally formed. So does it basically just delete the original memory and override it? Or does this information leave the original information intact, but perhaps just impair children's ability to retrieve it? Maybe the misinformation becomes a stronger memory trace and therefore just easier for the children to recall. Or is it because witnesses who never encoded the original information in the first place, maybe if it's something they didn't see, simply adopt the new detail as their own? Or maybe it's a social process, where both the correct and misleading items of information are retained, but the misinformation is selected for in a more conscious act, due to children perceiving adults as a source of authority and wanting to comply with their beliefs. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for
That's great, thank you Kirsty, and I believe that Kirsty will be joining us for the Q&A session a bit later on, so there'll be an opportunity to ask questions regarding her research at that point. Okay, so we will move on to our next speaker now, who is Avril Rodriguez Vasquez.
Yes.
There we are. I was wondering where you were. Okay. So, the floor is yours.
I have such reserve.
Do that.
I'll do it. Of course, I'm here. Thank you. No. Sorry. There you go. Hello. So it's my first presentation, and I'm thinking in Spanish and speaking in English, so if I mix two languages, just bear with me. So I'm going to talk about credibility and public perception of scientific knowledge from an institutional perspective. Starting with what is an institution. We're going to define an institution by a human construct that has one aim, and it follows some rules, and it has structures of power and money. And then we're going to talk about dissemination of knowledge. What kind of knowledge? We're going to define it after the amazing discussion we had before. So what we are going to focus is in specialized knowledge. This can be from an academic institution, a university, a research center, or even a marketing firm, which I know it's a bit crunchy to say that they have expertise and they follow the scientific model, but sometimes they do. So, start with scientists. Scientists, researchers, intellectuals, or academic. I'm going to use those words, like meaning what kind of people is generating this knowledge. They are in academic institutions, which are also human construct. They have one aim, which is to, let's say, develop the truth and the science and for the benefit of the society. And they follow rules and regulations, which we like to call academia, and we're usually proud of it. And we follow structures of power, and we need money to keep functioning. Academic institutions are specifically like prestige. So that's an added point there, because we love when people call us smart. In post-expert digital age, obviously the dissemination of everything changed. And the use of these digital tools benefit the science-society interaction. So to talk about a digital infrastructure, of course, not everybody has internet, not everybody has computer or cell phones. Maybe in some parts of the world they do, but not everywhere. So we're going to focus on people that have access and have the knowledge on how to use these tools. So this is really focused on the context. Generalizations are not welcome when we talk about this, because there's still a lot of people that don't have access to this. So taking that into consideration, we want to talk the difference between traditional media and what it's becoming dissemination on internet. Classic dissemination for academics would be books that a few of our family members would buy and read. Then they would end up in a really nice library at the university. Or conferences like this, where usually the level and the same language are in the same level. If some luck would come to you, you would be invited to a television show or something that it's on the media, radio, or publications that you could actually give your knowledge to the public. In this case, the first thing that happened when internet came is that academic institutions started publishing on websites. This did not make a lot of difference in the way they disseminated because there's no interaction with the public. These websites are businesses and they want to make a profit. So they started to decide who gets published and who doesn't, which is their prerogative, but that doesn't help to the greater benefit of the society in the way that we intend to. So in the post-expert digital area, it means, sadly, that everybody is an expert, and if they are not experts, then they call themselves like that, and everybody has an opinion. I'm sure most of people here have social media, and the thing that we use it doesn't mean that we know exactly how to use it. Like everybody has a camera, but not everybody is a photographer. These are just some statistics from the UK. And then we come to the use of Twitter from academic institutions. When I said that everybody has an opinion, I mean it, because I ran into a publication from Cambridge saying that the elephant's DNA can help develop the cure for cancer, which I thought it was amazing. And it got 1 like. And a reply by a lady saying that she has a nice soup recipe that could help with that. Unfortunately, I lost that tweet, but I like this one from MIT, which is using basic language. It's using an engaging image that you would not think that is specialized language or high science. And the response was lame. So everybody has a voice in the social media. There are some benefits, obviously. The interaction is in real time. You get a lot of data from who interacts with your content, if they click the link to get more information, if they don't. The value is on the production, not in the publication, so you can repost in different platforms. And most importantly, you generate or try to generate trust. It means that if someone interacts with your content repeatedly, they learn how you use the language, how you use images, and you become part of the daily life. In this context, I'm from Mexico, so my research is in Mexico, just to give you an idea of my country. In extension is number 13, in population is number 10 in the world, and economy is number 11, although our president is trying really hard to change that, to bring us into like the 20s, sadly. Something interesting to know which kind of research is made in Mexico is to analyze the income. So most of the income comes from exports in auto industry, which is interesting considering that there's no Mexican brand of cars. Second is, we call it remesas. Remeses? It's the money that the 20 Mexicans, first and second generation Mexicans that live in the United States, send to Mexico every year, and that's our number 2 income. Somehow the government right now says that this is a success of their government, and I fail to understand how people having to go to another country and then send money is a success from the government. Maybe that's just me. And then we have oil exports and tourism, which I'm sure you're familiarized with Cancun and all that happens there, so it's lovely. My research specifically is in the Public Research Center. So the federal government has this Council for Science and Technology, It has 26 research centers, and I'm studying 10 of them that specifically in their mission states that they are interested in scientific dissemination. It's interesting to check data like the population, the location in the country, because that would tell you whether, since it's a really big country, the scholarity they have, even the languages they speak. In the south, you can see Yucatan has 22% of people that speak indigenous language. So it would be interesting to see if the research centers take this into consideration when they do their dissemination. And obviously to see how, the access they have to internet in which regions of the country. I started my research in 2020, and things were different by a lot of things. But right now, there's a situation in Mexico where the president is a bit insecure. So he is making CONACYT ban its researchers for criticizing him, which is sad because the president is against clean energy. He says that oil is the future, things like that. And every time he says something like this, he has a research center or a scientific body to back him up. So when I started doing this research, I was intended to see how institutions use dissemination or what tools they use. And now it's become of how institutions' dissemination create the misinformation and how to try to help. I don't have answers, but I just think it's interesting. That's it.
That's great. Thank you, Gabriel. So we have our slide.
Sorry.
I'm
trying
okay.
to communicate
You kept that lovely.
Tajudeen, because of the access remote, I just haven't yet replied to my message.
Okay. So there may be a short
Yes.
delay.
Tajudeen, if you're listening, I can see you on Zoom. I've just sent you a quick message to confirm how we're liaising this, so I can give you screen share.
Go to the next speaker and then just reverse. It's Matthew here, yeah?
You good?
Yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Are you okay to speak now, Ross? We're just having a few issues with Tajudeen's connection. Sorry to do that then. Great. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so our next speaker is Matthew Butler then, here from the Department of Sociology.
Hi, thanks for coming along. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking today about something which is quite pervasive in when we talk. You may recognise it, but I think a lot of the time we take these kinds of things for interaction. It's a very subtle practice, and we're going to look at it in some news interviews. Hopefully you've all got a handout which has 3 transcripts on. I just printed those off because it will hopefully help you kind of just get a sense of what's going on. So I'll sort of talk through each instance and we'll see how we go. So we're going to have a look at the first instance now. This is a news interview with James May on the right. He is a former member of Top Gear. I'm not sure what background you know about Top Gear, but basically one of the presenters, Jeremy Clarkson, punched someone and he got sacked. This becomes quite relevant when we watch this clip. So this news interview is called This Morning, sort of a lifestyle interview. James is part of this new version of Top Gear on a different channel. So we pick up the interview when Ruth, who is the presenter, asks a question to James.
How determined were you all to stick together after Jeremy left, shall I say, the BBC?
Very well done, Nick.
Thank you.
So this, on the face of it, the question, how determined were you all to be stick together after Jeremy left seems quite normal and fine. But actually, when we delve into how that question is designed and what it's doing, it seems to be alluding to a problem. Notice that in line 2, we have this half-second gap. Now, often people say to people studying interaction, why would you time the length of a pause? Well, a half-second gap here is quite telling. Notice that the ones which precede it in lines 1 and 2 are sort of micro-pauses. And it comes just before she says left. And she says left with a bit of laughter in it, and we sort of know that sometimes laughter can convey from a speaker a problem or maybe some issue or something perhaps being ill-fitted. So it's quite telling that it comes within left. Because someone can say that someone's left even though they have been sacked, which is what we know has happened to Jeremy. And it's likely that the participants also know that. So how that's been conveyed, it's kind of elusive in a way. She's alluding to this problem, perhaps this slightly controversial matter that Jeremy's been sacked, actually he punched someone. But she doesn't go beyond that. She doesn't make that explicit. That remains beneath the surface. And notice how James replies in line 3. He says, very well done. That seems quite an odd way of responding to a question. You might expect say thanks, or that's a good question, but very well done, yes. Seems to be doing something related to how she asked the question. Perhaps it's conveying appreciation of her handling of that controversial matter, being quite neutral. And also notice that he doesn't make explicit the controversial matter either. He sidesteps Jeremy's departure from the BBC. So we're going to go on to extract 2 now. This is a news interview with a Labour politician. What's worth noting is about 2 weeks before this interview took place, there was an extension to Article 16. And I guess there was many views around that, maybe positive or negative views around that, because it was quite a long, drawn-out process, some might say. So we pick this up from the start of the interview. This is where usually the agenda of an interview takes place.
Alex joins us live on LBC. Jess, hello. Welcome along. Thank you for being here. There are many reasons why you've come in today, but one of them is to not talk about Brexit. Yeah. There are a couple of reasons why that would be the case, not least that we've got these 50 MPs from 7 parties who are forming a group to tackle the issues that are quote-unquote ignored by Brexit.
So I think, first of all, what's quite telling is actually this is the start of the interview where usually we'd find out what is going to be talked about. The thing which struck me was actually he says what's not going to be talked about. That's Brexit in line 4. He could have said we're not going to talk about what you had for dinner last night or anything, but he specifically disclaims Brexit. And she says yeah and laughs a bit. She doesn't sort of convey her view of why Brexit's not going to be talked about. She could have said, well, I want to talk about it, I find it important. Or she might have also said that, well, actually, that's good, I find it really boring. But that doesn't happen. And then also, he goes on to say there are a couple of reasons why Brexit is not going to be talked about. Notice that he only gives one reason, and that reason is a topical connection with the interviewee. And he further conveys this quite neutral stance towards Brexit and the kind of non-controversial views towards it. When he goes on to talk about this group to tackle the issues which are quote-unquote ignored. Now something really subtle about that quote-unquote, what that's doing is that's attributing the idea of what comes after, so quote-unquote ignored, he's attributing that to a third party. We don't know who that is, but as far as everyone else is concerned, he is not conveying that. He's conveying that it's ignored, and he's attributing that to a third party. So again, what we're seeing is sidestepping of matters which remain beneath the surface. We can sort of see that there's a problem, perhaps relating to Brexit maybe, but these kept beneath the surface and not made explicit by the participants. The third case is a little bit different. It's from the same interview, and it happens shortly after the second extract. So we'll pick it up just as Jess Phillips is talking about her involvement in this group.
Reaction from the public, positive reaction I should say, from the public, then when you are willing to put aside some political differences to get an outcome. I didn't go to Westminster.
So this one's really quick, so I'll talk this one through in a bit more detail. It's different from the past two because there isn't really a controversial matter, but there's still something which arises sort of in the moment, which is perhaps problematic, which remains beneath the surface, but both speakers kind of orient towards it. They look at it, but they don't make it explicit. And that is her correction, her self-correction in line 2. I never get more reaction from the public, positive reaction. So she said reaction. One might assume that the reaction she is conveying or is orienting to is maybe negative forms of reaction, such as heckling or maybe trolling. Of course, she uses a qualifier in line 2, positive reaction. She makes it clear that what was meant was positive reaction. And she sort of signals in a way through the laughter in positive reaction, the smile, which you might have noticed that that was what was meant. And what is sort of left unsaid are the negative aspects of the earlier form of reaction which she conveyed. Notice also that in line 5 she says, I should say, a little bit like Ruth in line 1, shall I say, in the first case on line 2, shall I say. Often we find these kinds of formulations occur when speakers are really sort of encountering or handling maybe controversial or delicate matters. And I guess to finish off, it leaves the question of, well, why is this stuff relevant? Well, I think it really shows how participants in the moment, in this unfolding of an ordinary life, how they can handle these moments which emerge in interaction. And I think in a way what we've seen in these 3 cases is ways in which speakers can sort of convey shared understanding and in some cases make inferences, how they can do that and still leave these things beneath the surface and left unsaid. So thanks for listening.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. Okay, so we have a few minutes now for questions from the audience. So we've got a hand up immediately. So
it's relevant to KIRSTY's presentation. It's more of a comment when we said fact and opinion in law. So basically in law, an eyewitness would be a statement of a fact. The eyewitness person would state a fact, and the expert witness will state an opinion on their expertise. However, in jurisprudence, the fact when a person says something about the eyewitness kind of incident, or like when they are testifying, and it's basically they are giving their opinion of what they saw visually or heard. And so it distills to actually also the eyewitness will also give an opinion in that sense. So there is a movement in law now in the reforming of the law to actually instruct the jury to understand that the eyewitness will give an opinion of what they saw or what they heard. So because of prosecution is getting high because of eyewitness, and the scientific literature is saying that eyewitness is not necessarily factual. It doesn't sometimes encounter, like you have lots of visuals, like locations and stuff like that could interfere with that opinion of the eyewitness itself. So it's not basically a fact. So the juries don't kind of hold it in big regard, and like when they're giving the sentencing of what they heard about the eyewitness. But it's just like the law is like also kind of aware of that kind of. There is like, cannot say it's a fact, but it's kind of an opinion of a fact or opinion of what you saw or what you heard. Thank you.
And that was the question for KIRSTY.
And it was a comment based on what we said earlier about the fact and opinion distinction in law.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And KIRSTY, would you like to respond to that?
Hi. Yes, it was a little bit difficult to hear. It's quite echoey, and I think my connection's a little bit not great. But yeah, I think there is some sort of expectation during court proceedings that jurors are instructors, certainly for verbally sort of leading questions and things like that. But yeah, it's just not generally done for gestural information really, and like you say, it's a lot of it is. It's almost like an opinion at the end of the day, because if you can't really trust your own memory, then I think jurors should probably be advised about that sort of research, really. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. A question at the back.
Hi, I had a question for Avril about your research. Will you be doing, you mentioned about how they're restrained somewhat by politics. So, like, will you be doing interviews with people in those research centres? Or I just wondered about the data you'd be gathering.
Yeah, I'm gonna do interviews with the people that is in charge of dissemination in the institution. So mainly administrators, not researchers, which at the beginning I thought it was a good idea because they will be focused on better dissemination. But I have a feeling that I'm going to get a different narrative now that they are, at least my perception is that they are giving a line or a specific speech or way to address some issues. So it's going to be interesting to talk to them. And if I have the time, I'll talk to some scientific, but it's mainly people that are in charge of the dissemination from the institution.
I believe you should use Matthew's technique.
It would be, yeah.
Yeah. But things that are not said. Do listen to
And that is not said, yeah.
Can I make a question to Matthew?
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Can you explain us a little bit about your method?
Yeah. So it's conversation analysis, which I used to basically what happened was I had a collection of news interviews and just watched them, and that's when I noticed that this kind of pattern happening. It was quite an inductive process, I guess. So it emerged from just observing the interactions rather than sort of having a hypothesis about how these things were dealt with.
I just say, I think your methodology is really interesting.
Yeah,
And
it's not
I
my
think-
own, by the way.
Well, it's fine. I think it's probably, I think everyone's going, oh, that methodology, because there's so much qualitative work. You focus on the transcripts of what's been said or what's not been said, and we don't pay a lot of attention to the interactions, the non-verbal cues, the spaces and things, and I think it has value in many forums to actually, and I know it's more difficult than just working with the words you have, but offering that unsaid information or the manner in which it's said is actually speaks much more. So I think, in terms of like where you're going to go with it and what you're going to do, but I think a methodology paper would be really helpful to all sorts of people in different forms.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because I think one of the things that I take away from conversation analysis is that language is action, or social action, and that's how we live our everyday lives. We do these things, we don't do things randomly, we do things orderly and they have a purpose, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a question for you as well. So do you think there can be changes to the news environment to make things that are not explicit?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I guess, I guess it's mainly because often, even often in sort of when we talk informally, we will say things and assume that other people know about things, and I think that's perhaps what is the case in what we saw today. It's like common knowledge, which we don't need to talk about, but sometimes those things might need to be brought to the surface. But I think if people bring things to the surface, sometimes that can be problematic. So if we're trying to achieve neutrality, you can't often be so explicit. So I think there's maybe a balance.
say something about this kind of prohibition of critique by the president and how institutions have responded to it?
Yes. It was a strong recommendation not to criticize. But September 2021, the federal prosecutor issued apprehension order for 30 researchers from the research centers, which the accusation is not public, but it's been said that it's because they were corrupt and or they were not in good moral values of taking money from the public and use it for their own interests. So it's not a good perspective. In Mexico, the president gives a press conference every day for 3 hours in the morning. So if you can think in the States, like Democrats watch the New York Times or read, and Republicans watch news. In Mexico, you don't have the two media. You have the president talking, and then you have the media or the researchers that are trying to contrapose what it said. I have a scholarship from the CONACYT, the National Council for Science and Technology, and as students we were advised not to engage with content that would criticize the government right now. It works like that. It's not official, but it's there. So.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to hear.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so we run slightly over our scheduled time, but I'm just wondering if there's any questions from anyone online, or there aren't. Okay, all right. Well, okay, so we can't come to the end of our time here this afternoon, but I'd just like to thank all the speakers for their contributions to the session and also for all of your questions. So we're going to take a break here now, and I've been asked to remind you that you should cast your votes for the poster competition in the break time before we move to the next session. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.